On the night of November 9th, 1989, thousands of small, smoking two-stroke cars rolled across a border that had been closed for 28 years, and a nation on the other side watched them come through in disbelief. Some of those cars were bought with champagne poured over their hoods. Some were simply abandoned by the roadside once they'd done their job. Almost none of them were built to last, and that was, in a strange way, exactly the point. This is the story of the Trabant, a car built out of old cotton waste and phenol resin because a communist government simply didn't have enough steel, and how it ended up as one of the most unlikely symbols of the fall of the Berlin Wall. East Germany, formerly the German Democratic Republic, faced a genuine problem in the years after the Second World War. The country wanted to give its citizens an affordable, practical car of their own, the way West Germany had the Volkswagen Beetle. But steel was scarce, tightly rationed, and mostly allocated to heavier industry and export goods that could earn hard currency abroad. Engineers at the state-owned VEB Sachsenring factory in Zwickau were told to design a people's car anyway, with only a fraction of the raw material a normal automobile would need. Their solution was genuinely inventive. They developed a material called Duroplast, made by soaking waste cotton fiber, sourced cheaply and in bulk from the Soviet Union, in phenol resin left over from East Germany's dye industry, then pressing the mixture into rigid, lightweight body panels. It wasn't glamorous. Unpainted, it looked something like dense felt or cardboard, a resemblance that would later fuel a persistent myth in the West that the Trabant's body was literally made of cardboard. It wasn't, but the confusion is understandable, and honestly not entirely undeserved as an insult. The engineers built the resulting car, initially known as the P50, around a proper steel unibody frame, with the Duroplast panels bolted on as lightweight skin rather than structural material. According to some accounts, the design team developed this steel frame version largely on their own initiative, without full approval from higher party officials, and only revealed the finished design once it was essentially complete. The car was formally unveiled in 1957, and it entered production the following year under a new name, the Trabant, meaning companion, or satellite, a nod to the Soviet space program of the era. It was, by any honest measure, a modest machine. Early versions used a smoky two-stroke engine making around 18 horsepower, with a total of only 5 moving parts. Refueling meant lifting the hood, adding a measured amount of two-stroke oil directly into the tank, and physically rocking the car back and forth to mix the fuel and oil together, because the Trabant had no separate oil injection system to do it automatically. Top speed hovered somewhere around 60 to 70 miles an hour, depending on the model and how charitable you wanted to be. Later models produced roughly 9 times the hydrocarbon emissions and 5 times the carbon monoxide of an average Western European car of the same era. And yet, people wanted one desperately. Demand for the Trabant consistently outpaced what the factory in Zwickau could produce, and waiting lists stretched anywhere from 10 to as long as 17 years. A used Trabant, remarkably, could sell on the open market for more than double the official state price of a brand new one, simply because buying one new meant waiting the better part of 2 decades. Meanwhile, the East German government, satisfied that demand remained strong and unwilling to redirect scarce development funds elsewhere, largely left the car's basic design unchanged for over 3 decades. Several more advanced prototypes were proposed by Trabant's own engineers over the years. Nearly all of them were rejected by state leadership, primarily on grounds of cost. Then came 1989, as the political pressure that had been building across the Eastern Bloc finally reached its breaking point, and East Germans found routes west opening up, first through Hungary, then through Czechoslovakia, then finally at the Berlin Wall itself. Thousands of ordinary families packed what they could into their Trabants and drove. On the night of November 9th, as crossing points at the wall opened, a long, slow procession of smoking, sputtering little cars crossed from east to west Berlin, a scene captured on television around the world. The route many families took through Czechoslovakia toward the West German border became known informally as the Trabi Trail, and it was, by multiple accounts, genuinely littered with Trabants that broke down and were simply left behind once they'd carried their owners far enough. In reunified Berlin in the weeks that followed, the smell of the Trabant's smoky two-stroke exhaust became so strongly associated with that moment of political change that people reportedly took to calling it, half-jokingly, the perfume of freedom. But the affection didn't last long. Almost as soon as East Germans gained access to Western cars, many of them abandoned their Trabants entirely, some by the side of the Autobahn, some simply left running or not in driveways and side streets, eager to trade up to a Volkswagen or an Opel the moment they could afford one. The same car that had carried an entire population toward freedom became, almost overnight, a symbol of the poverty and stagnation many East Germans were desperate to leave behind. Production continued for a couple more years, briefly modernized through a late collaboration with Volkswagen that replaced the old two-stroke engine with a proper four-stroke unit, before finally ending for good in 1991. Over its full run, from 1957 to 1991, more than 3 million Trabants were built, making it one of the most produced cars in the history of Central and Eastern Europe. Today, surviving Trabants have become genuine collector's items, prized in clubs as far away as Japan and the United States, precisely for the same qualities that made them a punchline for decades. In 1990, the Irish rock band U2 famously adopted the Trabant as visual shorthand for a changing Europe on the cover of their album Achtung Baby, painting them in bright colors as a kind of ironic celebration. The Trabant was never a good car by any conventional measure. It was underpowered, badly polluting, and built from a material invented specifically because a government didn't have enough of the real thing. But for one night in November of 1989, it was also, quite literally, the vehicle that carried an entire country across the line between one kind of life and another. Do you think the Trabant's terrible reputation is fair given the real material shortages its engineers were working with? Or was it simply a bad car that happened to be present at a historic moment? Let me know what you think in the comments.